G'day everybody, and for those who come in late, you're listening to Expand the Phantom Podcast.
Washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck, and upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die." The Phantom, the ghost who walks. The Phantom, enemies beware. The Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds you.
Hello, we are the Chronicle Chamber team, and this is Expand the Phantom Podcast. Our website is chroniclechamber.com, and you can contact us via our email at chroniclechamber@gmail.com. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're also on Instagram and YouTube as well. So make sure you check us out there. If you want to subscribe to us on our podcasts, you can via YouTube, where we have a video podcast. iTunes and Android, and the various Android apps if you prefer listening to it on audio while you're driving in the car. Now, this is episode 186, and I'm really excited about this. We are going to be chatting with Ben Raab. Now, if that name doesn't quite sound familiar, we'll introduce Ben, and I'm sure we'll get your memories ticking over as well. So my name is Jermaine, and today I am joined by
Ben Raab. Nice to meet you.
How you going, Ben? Unfortunately, yeah. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Now, unfortunately, Dan and Steve won't be joining us today. They've been called away with their school teaching duties. One's at a camp and one's in hospital at the moment, looking after someone who's had a slight head injury during sport. So it's just me today. But Ben, do you prefer Ben, Benjamin? What do you prefer?
I mean, Ben's fine. Yeah, I in print and on television, I go by Benjamin, but everyone calls me Ben.
No worries. I gotta ask. My brother's name's Ben, and sometimes he likes Ben, sometimes he likes Benjamin. So I just figure you just gotta ask.
Yeah, no, fair question.
So thank you for joining us. To start off with, I was just wondering if you could start off telling us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how old you are, or the range, if you don't want to give exact dates, where you grew up, and then I guess we could just go from there about, learning a bit about you, and then we'll get into the Phantom.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm older than dirt, and I'm originally from New York. I don't have the traditional New York accent, even though I grew up on Long Island, like everyone, has got the accent from New York. You think I talk like this. That's not really how I speak. But for most of my life, I have been a, comic book writer, TV writer, fan of genre material. And now I'm lucky enough to be able to do that for a living. I started my career in comics in the mid 90s at Marvel. I was an intern, worked at Marvel for about 4 years. I was the assistant editor on the X-Men books before I went freelance and started writing comics professionally. I worked for Marvel. I worked for DC. I worked for Moonstone. I've worked for Egmont. I've worked for a lot of different publishers. And that was back in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. And then my wife and I, at the time, it was just the two of us before we had kids, we moved to Los Angeles for her work. And that's when I started the journey to try and become a film and TV writer, which took quite a while. But eventually I did land my first job in television, which was a TV show called Warehouse 13. I have a writing partner. His name is Derek Hughes. We've been working together pretty much for 20 some odd years.
Wow.
We actually met in a comic book store, believe it or not. We refer to it as our geek cute. And we started that journey together, and it's one that's taken a while. But like I said, we got our start in TV on a show called Warehouse 13, and we were on that for the entire run of the show, all 5 seasons. After that, we worked on a show for 2 seasons called Beauty and the Beast, which featured Australian actor. What the hell's that guy's name? I forgot his name's gone completely out of my head. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I feel so bad. It was Kristen Kruk, who used to be on Smallville, And
I'm quickly trying to Google it so I can try and save you.
Oh, it's so bad. I never actually met the guy. Oh, Jesus. Anyway, but he's from your neck of the woods. After Beauty and the Beast, we ended up on The Flash, which we did for a season, and worked on third season of the TV show Scream for MTV. We worked on Arrow for 2 seasons, and currently we are writing on a TV show called Legacies, which is the second spinoff from The Vampire Diaries.
Was it Jay Ryan?
Jay Ryan. I knew it was something Ryan. Yes, Jay Ryan.
And for those who are interested, it is on Stan, which is a TV provider, TV show provider as well. So,
please watch it, because then if we get foreign residuals, that's great. Actually, just got some from Beauty and the Beast today, which is not a lot, but I'll take it.
No worries. Well, I will admit I've never watched Beauty and the Beast, but I really enjoyed Warehouse 13 and Flash and Arrow as well. So
Thank you.
I've got some questions about that later down the track as well. So
yeah, sure.
Now, so you said that you were an editor at Marvel first, and then that's where you kind of broke into it. Is that correct?
Yes.
No worries. So did you always want to be a writer?
It's funny. No, I didn't. I mean, like, honestly, like most kids, you have dreams of being an astronaut, you have dreams of being a rock star, you have dreams of all these other things, and because you're readily shown what it is someone does. When it came to comics, if you don't stop and actually sit and look at the credits page, you don't know exactly how these things are made. And so the idea of being a comic writer wasn't something that I was like, oh, that's a job path. It wasn't until I had gotten out of college, actually, with an English lit degree, that really didn't qualify me for anything other than, having read a bunch of books and learned how to write papers and stuff. There was no sense of, like, I didn't have an awareness that, oh, I could be a comic book writer or editor, I certainly wasn't an artist, so that was never going to be a path for me. But I had taken a couple of screenwriting classes in college, and 2 of the scripts that I had written just for fun, like in my senior year, and this is the early 90s, so that dates me. When there was rumor that there was going to be an X-Men movie, I was like, well, I'm a huge X-Men fan. I'm going to be the guy who writes that. Such luck. But those 2 scripts that I wrote, which were parts 1 and 2 of a trilogy, did actually get me a meeting at Marvel Comics, where I was basically told, look, if you want to, we can offer you a temporary paid internship, since you're not in school anymore. If you've got like 3 to 4 months to sort of make a splash there, and this was, again, the early 90s, when Marvel kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you do a good job and people like you, and someone has a chance to promote an assistant, maybe they'll hire you. So I started in the summer of 1993, and I worked in the special projects department, which was trading cards and posters. And I was working under Bob Budiansky, was the senior editor. Tom Brevoort, who I believe is now, I don't know if he's the publisher now. I know he's very high up there at Marvel right now. And Glenn Greenberg, his assistant. So I was their intern, and again, I was gathering reference for trading card sets, and the set that they were working on at the time, serendipitously, was the X-Men set, which I'd been a lifelong X-Men fan. Like, one of my first comics was X-Men 107, the issue right before John Byrne takes over on art, the last Dave Cockrum issue, when the X-Men go into space and they're fighting the Imperial Guard. And it's just, the splash page from that issue is still one of my favorite pages of comics ever. It just blew my mind. So because I had such a knowledge of the X-Men books, I was constantly in the X-Men office pulling references, and always knowing what page and panel to find for them. Yeah. So that it was like, look, I know exactly which issue I'm looking for. I'm looking for this book, this page. And it's like, it allowed me to sort of go seamlessly in and out of their office without them having to stop and help me. they just showed me the file cabinet. I was like, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And if you've got that issue, then I know where to find it. So that made a huge impression on Bob Harris, who was the X-Men editor at the time. And by the end of my 4 months in special projects, I was lucky. Again, because this was a time when Marvel kept growing and growing. So there was a lot of promoting from within. And special projects offered me a job, which was really cool. And I was like, okay, well, it's a full-time job, and it's, with salary and insurance benefits. Like, this is a good gig. But then surprisingly, the Punisher office, the editor at the time, Don Daly, was promoting his assistant to associate editor and needed a new assistant. So he came and approached me, and I was like, wow, okay, this is really cool. Like, I've got, 2 options here. I wasn't a huge Punisher fan, and special projects was cool, but it wasn't comics.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like, okay, so 2 jobs, and I'm like, well, happy to be in the company, happy to have the opportunity, but it wasn't like the brass ring for me. And then Bob Harris got wind of the fact that I was being offered these jobs, and he was about to promote his assistant. So I'll never forget, because I sat at the return of Glenn Greenberg's desk. That was my office, right? Like, so here's the desk, here's the return. I had a chair sitting right here, and I was sitting there, and Bob Harris was like, walk with me. And I was like, okay. And so we're walking down the hall, and he's like, so Lisa Patrick, my assistant, is being promoted to associate, and I'm going to need a new assistant editor. What do you say? Are you interested? And I was like, that's the job I want.
Yeah.
and that was the job I took. And I was grateful for that, and I was lucky. And I worked in that office for around a little over 2 years. Got to work on the Age of Apocalypse series. That was a real fun project to be a part of, like, to just, see Joe Madureira sketches and Adam Kubert sketches of these alternate versions of these amazing characters coming in. I remember people calling in, freaking out, because the word had gotten out that the X books were canceled. Like, that Marvel was suspending publishing on the X-Men books, and everyone was like, "What? Are you crazy? What are you doing?" And I'll never forget. I was on the phone with someone, actually got the office number and called, and the receptionist put it through to my desk, and they were like, I'm gonna stop reading Marvel books forever. I'm never gonna read another Marvel book again if you do this. And I was like, buddy, hold on. Just go with this. Just trust me. You're going to enjoy it, right? And because the gag was, we were canceling the books, and we were replacing them with the 4-issue limited series of this alternate reality version of the X-Men books. And then, of course, once that was over, everything went back to normal. It's just like, it was a break in the publication of the regular monthly titles to do the alt versions, to do Astonishing X-Men, to do Amazing X-Men. Like, that was the fun of it. But people were freaking out.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I worked, in that office for 2 years, and coincidentally with, like, my professional growth and rise, we were seeing a lot of corporate shrinking because Marvel was going bankrupt. They had, there were two years in a row, people were getting laid off around Christmas time, which really sucked.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough that I did get to keep my job, but the opportunity for growth and advancement was there was a little stagnation going on. And, at that time I started to write comics. I got to do my first published short story was it was an 8-page Giant Man story in the back of Avengers 375. And then I did another 8-pager of the Black Widow in Avengers 382, I think it was. So it's just, I was really starting to dip my toe into writing, and you get bit by the bug, you want to do it more and more. And so I was like, well, I think this is really where I want to go with this. And then I eventually got to work on the book Excalibur for Marvel. That was my first regular series. Oh, but actually before that, I did my first full-length story was a What If. It was actually What If number 88, which the premise of it was, what if Peter Parker had been bitten by a radioactive spider but not gotten powers? Instead, he got cancer, but passed on the mutation to his son, who was a mutant. So it was called Arachnomorphosis. It was drawn by a South American artist, Ariel Olivetti. It was really cool. It was just really fun to sort of play in that, take my love of mutants, but do it in a different way with a different character like Spider-Man. But yeah, and then I ended up getting my first full regular gig was Excalibur, with Salvador Larroca from Spain. And at the time, Marvel was starting an interactive department. This was the mid 90s, like 1996. And the internet was sort of booming, and Marvel wanted to get in on that action and have a website, and they had a big deal with America Online, and they wanted someone from the editorial side who had experience with comics and characters to sort of be the first online editor, which I did for about 6 months, because at the same time I was writing comics freelance for Marvel, and it was just a 20-hour day every day. And really, it was like, this internet thing, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. So I figured, let me focus on what's really gonna be huge, which is writing comics. Like, I'll never forget, I got sent out for a conference about, I don't know what it was about, but my boss sent me to San Francisco. All of like Silicon Valley's, luminaries were showing up, and they were making these presentations, and I was going into these things. I was like, oh, so it's going to be like Comic-Con, right? And it was nothing like Comic-Con. I had no idea what I was doing, why I was there, what I was supposed to do, who I was supposed to talk to. Like, I don't know, pardon my language, but I don't know jack about like Sun Microsystems and why I should be sitting and listening to their CEO talk. Like, I'm sorry, like I'm not cut out for this. Yeah. And that was sort of the moment of epiphany where I was like, I think I was writing enough, and again at the time there were actually like royalties and stuff, because books were selling like ridiculously, that I thought, what, let me give this writing thing a shot, and I did, and I went freelance in 1997, and I kind of haven't looked back since. Yeah, wow.
Now, I've read one of your interviews that you've given before about the Phantom, and I believe, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm right or wrong on this, but you became a fan of the Phantom because of the Billy Zane movie. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is absolutely. That is something I do remember. Yes. I honestly had no awareness of the character, of Lee Falk or the strips or any of that until I think it was the summer of '96, going to Comic-Con, and they showed it on the plane.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I'll watch this, right? And it was just so much fun. Like, I really liked him as that character. I thought I was actually a really good casting choice. Yeah. And it was just such a fun movie, great ride that I was like, that's really cool. And I was like, I'm sorry I didn't know more about him at the time.
Yeah.
But it was a pleasant surprise, and it kind of opened my eyes to the character. Yeah. So yes, that is correct.
Awesome. So, and then I believe around a year or two later, you managed to get the job at Egmont, which, as an American writer, that was not something that they'd usually done before. How did you get that gig?
If I remember that correctly, I believe it was John Cassaday who introduced us, me to Ulf Granberg. I think Ulf was, we were still in New York. Ulf was in town. I'm not exactly sure what for, but I believe he was trying to get John to do some work. And because John was a huge Phantom fan, he was like, oh, you should meet my friend Ben. He's a comic book writer. He loves the movie, so he likes the character. So if you're interested, if you ever look, like, because he knew that he hired artists from all over the world, right? Yes. From Europe, Spain, all these different places. It wasn't just Scandinavian art. So he was like, if you ever need writing, talk to him. And so that's when I started, brushing up on the Phantom, learning a little bit more about the character. And then, he gave me my first Phantom work.
No worries. So your first Phantom story, well, the first one that was published, I believe, is The Temple.
Yes.
Was that the first one you wrote?
I believe it was, yeah.
So that was in 1999. Art was by Joan Boyks. And it was about the 19th Phantom, and I believe there was a chain from what was it called, from Samson, I believe it was. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, it was me trying to sort of like take the, a little bit of mythology that I love and sort of, bring it into the Phantom world.
Yeah, and I guess that's the beauty about the Phantom, is the fact that there's so much. There's 400 years. There's all the artifacts and stuff like that. It's quite fun to get those into a Phantom story.
Yes. Yeah. No, and it's like I said before we started the interview, when we were talking, like just the idea that how history can sort of influence your storytelling, and especially when you have a character that is history is just a central part of who the character is, and tradition and the passing down of things. That's just something I love to write about.
Yeah. So how did you find working with Team Fantomen? Like, was it because obviously you'd worked in DC and Marvel at that stage, and then working for a European publisher? Was there much difference?
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, their approach, again, because it was this one specific character as opposed to a character who inhabits a larger universe.
Yeah.
Everything was in service of maintaining the legacy of the character, maintaining the history and having to sort of also, like what is quote unquote Phantom approved, right? What is King Features obviously having a say ultimately in things like, which I dealt with more when I worked with Moonstone, I think, than really with Egmont. I think, Ulf was more of the keeper of Phantom lore and continuity. Even though he was open to certain things, it all kind of had to sort of fit within what the Scandinavian publishing audience wanted to see, or you know what I mean. Certainly, the way the art was done, this is something that was a bit of an education for me, because obviously here in the U.S. the style of the art, and when you write, you can write toward a double page spread, which is a single image, or a single splash page. That wasn't something that I was going to be able to do for Egmont. Egmont was like, no, we have very specific parameters for what the artists can do visually, so you have to write to that.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, that was probably the biggest difference. But everything else was great. I mean, he was Ulf was lovely. I really enjoyed working with him.
Yeah, we've had him on the podcast before, and he's a lovely guy to talk to. He's just got all the stories, and we did a podcast once about the top 20 Phantom influences throughout the whole history, and he was easily in the top 5.
Oh yeah.
Just
just such a huge fan. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like with his knowledge and the way what he did for such a long period of time, like I think it was from the 70s up until 2011 or something like that. It's just
right.
It's just amazing. So, what about the language barrier? Was there much of a language barrier? Obviously, you're writing in English and all that, and then it being translated to Swedish, and then for the Australian comics, which I've got a couple here, which you've written, it would then get translated from Swedish back to English.
Yeah. It's funny, like I actually never did a side-by-side comparison with like the scripts that I turned in, which then got translated, back to English. Like, I don't know if they just use, I'd have to look at it and see if they use the actual, if I can find those files, if they use the actual English dialogue that was originally done and just put that in the Australian edition, which would have made the most sense because it was written, for that. And, I don't remember there ever being any like mistranslation of the story. You know what I mean? Like whatever art was delivered. Again, Boyks is he's from Barcelona, so it's like, so there's so many different like layers of translation of this, but it all came together seamlessly. So full credit to Ulf and his team that they managed to from what I delivered as the writer to what ended up on the page. I couldn't tell you that there's any radical difference.
Oh, awesome. So just to kind of give you a bit of an idea in the Team Fantomen, so Boyks was Spanish. Spadero was South American from Argentina, who's just recently passed away. Felmang, Felmang's from Italy. And then you got Paul Ryan, who's from America, of
Yep.
course, and then
Yep.
Bade, Pena Bade, was from Germany originally. And then there was another one. Which one? Where was it? It was Dan Davis, who's also American. You did I'm not sure if you remember that story. It was like a cartoony style, I guess you can call it.
Yes. It was sort of, I believe the attempt was to try to do something Bruce Timm like what he sort of did with the Batman animated series, and I think that's why Dan Davis was doing that one.
Yeah, no, that was a fun story. That one. I've only ever seen the Swedish version of it because it hasn't been published in English. But yeah, it was nice. So, was there any stories from the Team Fantomen that kind of stand out? 20 years later.
Again, details are fuzzy, but I do remember enjoying writing the Spear of Destiny story.
Yeah.
That was when I was very excited about it to tell sort of a multi-part story. And I think I do remember that having to be a kind of a pitch to them, like, hey, can I not just do a one-off? Can I, have something that spans a few issues? And there was I think there was a little bit of back and forth on their end about it. But ultimately, it went through.
Yeah, no, I remember that story. I remember reading the story and enjoying it. For myself, the ones I enjoyed, there was one that we haven't talked about yet is The Invisible Phantom. For those, if you're on listening to it on audio, we will be showing screenshots and stuff on the YouTube channel. So this is The Invisible Phantom, where you've got a FBI agent does a transfer to the Jungle Patrol, and then he tries to find the Phantom. It was a really cool like detective style story. And it was just, yeah. So do you remember that story?
If I recall correctly, he doesn't find the evidence, right?
Yeah, he kind of finds some stuff and then he kind of like gives up. He gets like close, and then towards the end of it, it's just like, there's no Phantom. And then the Phantom's in the background laughing, having a laugh and stuff like that. So
yeah. I do remember that. That one was fun to write because I just loved the idea that, again, trying to impose something real onto the Phantom, like the idea that if this guy really existed, right, there'd be those who'd wanted to prove that his existence or debunk his existence, right? There's no, the idea of a man who cannot die, we the fans and the audience know, it's tradition that's passed down, but everyone else, but the legend, the lore is that it's the same guy and that he's immortal and that, and so like, what better fun to have than put an investigator who's trying to figure out, is it true or not? And then to come up empty handed, getting as close as he possibly could. It's like right there, but he doesn't succeed. That was just a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah, so towards the end, like he goes and then he finds Gran, who was obviously a setup, and then he goes, "Oh, you're not the Phantom," and then Gran laughs his head off, going, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm not the Phantom," and stuff like that. Yeah. So it had that humorous element towards the end, and you see the Phantom and Gran having a bit of a chuckle and stuff like that as well. But then there's that, what I liked about it, and I remember reading it as a younger person, it would have been in my 20s, I believe it would have been, is that it was the story was kind of from someone else's point of view. So, and a lot of the time when we're reading a Phantom comic, we're kind of looking and reading through it the Phantom's eyes. This was kind of looking at it through Agent Wise's eyes. It was just it was really clever.
That is the thing that, like, I remember anytime I would sit down to write a Phantom story, like the question was, whose point of view do you want to tell the story through? Do you want to tell it through? It's tricky. Like, it's something that I've learned working in television, where, from a week to week basis, a character goes on an emotional journey where they start in one place and they end in another, and they evolve, they grow, they change. In comics, sometimes you get that, and sometimes you kind of just, certain characters, and I think the Phantom is someone who, because of the nature of how do you sustain the individual for extended periods of time, you're forced to sort of tell stories that kind of reset, right? So that things go back to a version of status quo rather than having this deep involved continuity like you might find in a Marvel or a DC or whatever. But you get a lot of longevity out of that. You get, decades worth of stories because it's about the story you're telling specifically. So at some point, creatively, you want to find a different way in. You want to find a road that's not just through the Phantom's point of view. You might want to do it through Diana's point of view. You might want to do it through the, Kit or Heloise's point of view. And sometimes you do it through the outsider. And that one was definitely designed to be, let's do an outside perspective on it, because you get to then see the character in a different light without them having to grow or change or become something else. They still get to be that character, and this outsider's point of view becomes the audience's point of view.
Yeah. And I think
you never know if it's going to be someone's first comic ever, right? Like, let's say they've never read the Phantom, they picked up that one, then it's like, oh crap, there's a mystery around this character. I want to know more about it.
Yeah, definitely. There's another story, The Psychopath, which was written by Leonard Moberg, where it's very similar. It's like he's a bad guy who's in a mental institution, and he's retelling the story of how he got captured. And so throughout the whole story, you hardly see the Phantom because he's always in the shadows and stuff like that. And it adds to the mythos of the fact that the Phantom is supposed to be, mysterious. He's not, your friendly Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who everyone knows and stuff like that. The Phantom is a myth. So it really added to that myth, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
It also it got voted as the best story in, I think it was Norway or Sweden. I don't even Norway in 2001.
Sweet. That was news to me.
I've
never been voted number one in anything. That's awesome. I want to go back in time and tell my younger self. So cool.
Yeah. I remember in the Australian edition, they didn't have a voting system back then, but it did get a lot of popularity and a lot of good comments as well. So
nice. All right. Thank you, Australia, and thank you, Norway. You guys are awesome.
One of the other Team Fantomen stories I wanted to talk about is this one, The First Assignment, which was free issue 1349, where you actually did a story with Kit and Heloise in the future as as the Phantom. Where this one here, they're riding on motorbikes instead of horses. And then there's a scene, where was it? Where the Phantom has a pet tiger. Do you remember that story?
I do. I remember, maybe not all the details, but I do remember writing about the kids as grown-ups. Again, one of my favorite things about the Phantom is that notion of mantle passed from generation to generation, from father to, well, in this case, usually father to son, but because there are two, it's like, what would it be like if the duty was shared equally? If both Kit and Heloise had to sort of step into the role and be the Phantom. I get it does fight a little bit of the or present a little confusion when it comes to, like, well, if someone saw the Phantom and thought it was a man and sees Eloise's figure is clearly not male, how's that gonna what is that? Again, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's just a fun idea, and it's something that I don't think the Phantom, again, this is my interpretation of the character, as a father of two children, even though I wrote that pretty much. What year to come out again?
I believe it. Well, let me just double check. I won't guess. So it came out in. All right, so we'll go through. So in Australia, it came out in 2003, which was issue 1349, and issue 4/2003 for Norway, Sweden, and Finland.
Yeah, so that was at least a year before I even became a father. So, but at least I was thinking about it, and just thinking about that notion of, if you have this legacy that you have to hand down, it's not right to have to choose. It's not right to have to say one is going to be and the other is not. And so I just thought, well, it'll be really fun to tell a story with the two of them together, that they had inherited this mantle equally. And I mean, I think there had been female Phantom stories up before that. I don't think that I broke any ground on that level.
Yes, that's
Um,
correct.
yeah, so it was just sort of keeping with that tradition. It's like, well, then you know, just kind of cool if you sort of update it and, you know, picture them as grown-ups and yeah, they're not riding horses, they're riding motorbikes. Like, it's just, you know,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
quite Phantom 2040, but, you know, certainly, you know.
So towards the end, the way you ended it was really clever as well. So it was kind of like a vision from Old Man Moz, and then he had the story ended with Heloise injured. And then, you know, then Old Man Moz just walks off in the distance, and it's just like, you know, like, was it a vision? Was it actually going to happen, or did he just have bad pizza for dinner and have a nightmare or something?
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite clever how you did that as well.
Yeah, I mean, if ever I'd gotten to revisit that story, I wouldn't have made it just a dream. I would have had it be more of a premonition, because there's nothing worse than, oh, it was all just a dream stories. Like, you know, you want to pay it off. You want to have it actually really mean something.
Yeah, no, definitely. Dan, one of the podcasters, he's an English teacher, and he hates that. I think his words is like it's a cop out or something like that. So
yes, absolutely. No. So
then
then tell him that I was setting up for a future story, so he doesn't hate me.
Yeah, will do. So what's actually interesting is in the last couple of years, there's actually been a two-tone timeline in a sense, where there's been a couple of stories every year where Kit and Heloise do actually take over as the Phantom and stuff like that. So there's kind of like a dual timeline. So you kind of, with this story, you kind of beat them to it in a sense.
Wow. All right. It's ahead of the curve once. That's
cool. So there were a couple of stories that I really enjoyed with your Team Phantom, and then it seemed like you got the Moonstone gig. How did that happen?
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about it. I was trying to remember how I met Joe Gentile, who's the publisher of Moonstone. It must have been to be at Comic-Con. I can't remember how we might have connected otherwise, but it probably was Comic-Con, and maybe it was. I mean, I guess maybe either I had heard that they got the license, and because I'd written for Egmont, I reached out, or maybe he had. You know what? I honestly don't remember how we met up, but I do remember that. You know, he was great to work with, and you know, really gave me a lot of leeway as much as King Features would allow. They definitely had a heavier hand with him than they did with Egmont. I think partly because they were a small press. They were again, local relative to, in the US versus, overseas, and maybe didn't have as much of a track record. But what was cool is that, the initial impulse from them was, let's do higher end books. Let's not just do, pamphlet style monthlies. Let's do, prestige format, or as close to prestige format as they could afford. One shots, 48 pages rather than 22 pages. And so it was good to sort of, get my feet wet on those a little bit, have, these nicer format books, which obviously the intent was, well, if we do 2 or 3 of them, we've got enough material to collect into a trade paperback. So there's, second use of that. And then eventually they decided to do a monthly, which was cool too. But yeah, no, I loved working on those. Was that Fernando Blanco, I believe, was the artist for 2 of them. And then Lou Mana was the 3rd.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the Ghost Killer and the Singh Web. I'll just give me 2 seconds. What I want to do is while we talk, I'm actually going to try and share it on our screen. So where are we? Let's see if I can get this figured out. All right, there we go.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So this was one that I really enjoyed. Was just I really like the artwork. I like the style. And it was really felt modern as well. Actually felt like a part of real life Africa. There was real issues, and really like the style. I like the humor. Like this bit here was a little bit humorous, and
Yeah.
and then you had the femme fatale as well. She was quite a deadly. Were you planning on bringing her back?
No, I think it was all, kind of meant to be
A one-off.
I didn't revisit those first three stories when I was getting into the monthly. I imagine if had we done more, then I'm sure at some point I might have. But at that time there was no direct plan to say, hey, let's revisit some of the the characters or the subplots from the Prestige books.
Yeah. What I liked about the way you portrayed Diana was that she was actually like a hero in her own sense. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was someone who, was able to hold her, against herself, and she's kind of saved the day. She, just wasn't, a damsel in distress, which I think is good, because I think a lot of times people tend to portray Diana in the wrong way.
I don't know. I mean, she's his equal, right? Like maybe not costumed wise, but as his wife, she is to the Phantom what Lois is to Clark Kent. You know what I mean? Like to me, there was never any sense that she is the woman behind the man. She's the woman next to the man.
Yeah.
And I loved having her, front and center whenever I could. It just gives a different flavor, because it's like, it's something that I did a 3-issue miniseries for DC Comics called Legend of the Hawkman, which was, about Hawkman. It was a sort of out of continuity story, but it was my attempt to do a Hawkman year one, right? And it was, and the funny thing about it was it sort of paralleled what my wife and I were going through in the year one of our relationship, which was in the Hawkman story, they've come from Thanagar to Earth, and they're settling and they're having their life there. And one person's homesick, one person is happy to be there, and it's just they're having two very different experiences. And at that time, my wife and I had just moved from New York to Los Angeles, and we'd been married for only for less than a year. So it was. I love writing married characters, because even though they share an experience, they don't always experience things the same way. And I feel like that's kind of the fun of the Phantom and Diana, is that they're sharing this experience of him being the Phantom and her doing her stuff. But if they end up in a story together, they have a different point of view on what they're going through, even though their goals may be the same. The way they, and the way they do things and how they think of things are unique to each of them. So it's just like, it's chocolate and peanut butter. It's this great combination. That the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and you get a great story out of it.
Yeah, well, in this one, Diana actually knocks out two people. She knocks out the femme fatale, and then the arms dealer in the UN as well. So
badass.
Yeah, that's the way she should be portrayed. It was really enjoyable. And then the other one was the Singh Web. Now, was that an attempt to kind of replicate what the movie kind of should have been, or?
Probably. I'm sure I was far more influenced by the movie than I should have been. And that was my first real attempt to sort of dig into the Singh Brotherhood and play with the classic Phantom villains.
Yeah. It was just
right. The Shaolin stuff. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and then so then you've got the Indiana Jones style at the start of the movie as well.
Totally.
Then you've got the artifact. Obviously, she's probably a little bit more attractive than James Remar. No offense, James, but you got the web. So obviously, in the movie, they instead of the circles, they had the web tattoo and the symbol, which was what's on here as well.
It definitely drew off that.
Yeah, but this was fun. I I remember when it first came out, everyone was like, "Oh, look, the Phantoms were riding a black horse. What's going on?" And then you kind of realize, well, actually, hang on, no, it's the 19th or the 20th Phantom, and not
Right.
not Hero, who was the
Right.
the white one. So it was just this was a fun story as well. So you got there's so many nods in rereading it now. There's so many nods to the movie. Like you've got the when Billy Zane punches him into the tree and he gets knocked out at the start. It was. I actually really enjoyed this story as well. I also liked the Jungle Patrol. You really gave the Jungle Patrol center stage as well.
Right. Well, it's funny. Like I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and I always like when Brigadier. Well, I mean, I started as a Tom Baker fan when I was a kid, but like Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart and Unit and all that. Like it just to me that's Jungle Patrol, right? Like they're that to what those guys were to the Doctor. This is what they are to the Phantom.
Yeah, there's a good reference, a little bit of a nod to the Indiana Jones.
No, that's a blatant ripoff.
but
full disclosure.
I really this was a fun story. There was this bit here where you get the lady trying to get protected.
God, yeah, wow! I haven't seen this in so long. It's cool to see it again.
It was just it was really enjoyable. These were out of the, I think there was the 5 in the original series. These 2 of the graphic novels, these 2 were the ones that that I really enjoyed and really spoke to me. And I thought, wow, Moonstone's onto a winner here.
They were. I know. I think was it Mike Bullock picked up after I was done. It's like it's tough for a small publisher. Like they have a hard time. Money is not. They don't have the money to attract big talent, but they get good people. They get people who are really passionate about the characters. And I remember when Mike took over, he was a big fan too. So it's like, your property is in good hands with the people that you hire that are willing to do it because they love it so much. It's not about the money.
It is, but it's not the driving force, because we all
it's
know.
It's true. No, it's true. I mean, look, they need the money so they can make more books. Like that's It's circle of life, right?
Yes. You got to pay the bills, pay the artists, the writers, and everything like that as well. And then you did a couple of the. Now this is where I think you really hit these stories to this day are like still some of my all-time favorite stories. Was the Stones of Blood. Now there was one. I'm going to try and share this again. So this was at the start of when it became the regular series. I'm not sure if you remember this story.
With my buddy Pat Quinn, and John Cassidy did that cover. Yep.
Oh, and that's the John Cassidy that introduced you to Elf.
Yep.
Oh wow!
Yep. It all came full circle in that.
Yeah. The artwork's amazing.
Pat and I we've been collaborators for about 19 years now. We're currently doing a book that's on Comixology called Cryptopia. Okay. It's about this woman who's a cryptozoologist who basically travels the world trying to prove the existence of these hidden species and is sort of ridiculed and mocked for her beliefs, but ends up on an island. She and her team end up on an island that is full of these hidden species and cryptids, and it's just this big adventure story with a sci-fi twist at the end. We're 5 issues have been published right now. We started it in 2002.
Oh wow!
I'm slow, but we finally ramped up. We got 2 issues out onto Comixology last year, 4 and 5, and we've got issue 6. I still have to do the script for, but we hope to have those all done by the end of next year, and then maybe collect them all. But Pat, and this was almost 20 years ago he did this. I've just always liked his art. He's such a good. He really gets superheroes and knows how to sort of move his camera and tell a dynamic story. And so because we had worked together on Cryptopia, when Joe Gentile was saying that, hey, I think we're going to do a monthly. I was like, let's have this guy, if not all of them, definitely have this guy do the first couple, because he's fantastic. And his take on the Phantom was one of my favorites.
Yeah, I really like these panels here. So,
Yeah.
like for instance, you've got so for audio listeners, you've got Diana being shot at the end of issue 1, and then there's like the backdrop. You see her shadow, which is actually falling, and then you see her arms in the air, and all that. It's just very dynamic. And then you've got Kit, Heloise, and the Phantom just in anger and anguish as they, and then Lager as well. And then, not only do you have that, you've kind of got that, and then you're thinking, oh, great, wow, where are they going with this? And you've got the Phantom going through Hero in the middle of Morristown. And then I remember reading it, and this was when we got into Australia. This happened where the palace, or the presidential palace where Diana was giving the speech, just blows up, and there's a full page of just the place just blown up in smithereens. And I remember on the Phantom forum at that stage, it went off. Just everyone was like, he can't do that. And everyone was like, yes, he can. This is awesome. What's he got to do? And
wow.
all the fans were just, from going, that's it, Diana's dead. And then other people were trying to marry off the Phantom to the next person already. And so you had this huge range of just diverse conversations from the fans as they were trying to just pick apart and figure out what was going on.
That's awesome. Wow, I did not know that. That made such a stir.
Yeah, it did. It was it was a very successful. The Stones of Blood Part 1 and Part 2 was an amazing introduction to the monthly comic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I again, like we were saying before, Diana's a hero in her own right, and it's like I wanted to see what would happen to the Phantom if it looked like he might lose her.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, you get the fun shock value of, oh my God, she's been shot, the place has been blown up. Like, but it was really like, how is he reacting? How does he react to that?
Yeah, because it, I know when, like, I remember when my oldest had to go in an operation, the fears, because you can't control her, you're not there to protect her, and it's out of your hands and stuff like that. I can only imagine what it'll be like to think you've lost your wife or something like that. Just the emotions will be all over the place.
Yeah, right. Because it's like, again, the Phantom's presented a certain way in like the strips, in the old books, like again, I don't know if any of those stories, again, this is my ignorance, so forgive me and please don't hate me if I'm wrong, really kind of dug into that aspect of the character, the idea of the husband, who, part of what he does all this for, yes, is to protect Bengala, to protect the world, but it's about the people he loves, right? First and foremost. So yeah, that's what we were trying to do with that story.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Probably 2013 to 2016, there was in the newspaper stories. Tony D. Paul wrote it went on for about 2-3 years. It was about 5 stories, like together in a continuous story where he actually believed Diana was dead.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And it was just like, to this day, it's probably, in my opinion, one of the better newspaper stories that Tony DePaul has ever written, because it's just awesome. Obviously he had a lot more time and a lot more space to explore that anguish and stuff like that than what you did. You had 22 pages,
right?
But yeah, it's just you learn more about the character in an instance or in a circumstance like that.
Yeah, for sure. That was a fun 2-parter.
Yeah. Now the other one that I really enjoyed, and I really thought the artwork went well with it, was The Curse of the Phantom, which was
Nick Darrington. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to try.
Who I love to see. I love to see that his career has blown up as much as it has with DC in the past couple of years. I mean, I've always liked his style. I've always thought his style was fantastic, and it's only grown since we did that two-parter. He's just one of the best in the biz, no, without question.
Yeah, it's not as cartoony, or if you could say it, as some of the others. But what I really liked in here is, like we all know the legacy, and it's kudos to you for knowing the legacy of the Phantom as much, like with the Wesakar tribe and all that, is that we kind of learn about them and how they feel, having the stigma and stuff like that. So it was really enjoyable kind of getting to know about this tribe that basically has suffered in a sense because of the Phantom.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's become more common in our discourse in recent years, the notion of appropriation. But this was a story of appropriation. Like, I didn't realize it at the time as I was writing it, but in thinking back on it, it's the idea that, he wears the guise of someone that, of their god, right? Like, and that, you've got the groups that are trying to take their not narcotics isn't the right word, but their herbs and the things that they use tribally and turn it into something that they can profit off of. Like, it's just, there's a lot of that going on. Maybe it's a little bit of a statement on colonialization, again, whether I intended that or not, but I just like the idea of something that belonged to someone else.
Yeah,
is being used by our hero, and that.
Well, he stole it.
That, yeah, kind of. Yeah. I don't want to say it. You said it, not me. But it was, and now he has to face the consequences of that. Like, at some point, it comes back to bite you, right?
Yeah. And then I liked how they explored the different throughout the generations. So you had like in feudal Japan, and then you had where was it? So this was the feudal Japan. Then you have Princess Catherine with the 10th Phantom, and there was a couple of others and stuff. I think there was the other one Teddy Roosevelt, I believe it was. Teddy Roosevelt in the 90s and stuff like that. So you've got these brushes with
the 1890s. Right, before he ever became president. Again, I will freely admit that this storyline is something that I kind of stole from myself. Again, I told you I love history stuff, and I love doing those kinds of, like, seeing the character through the lens of different historical periods. It's something I did in a 4-issue X-Men miniseries about the Hellfire Club, where I basically told the origin of the Hellfire Club through the lineage of Sebastian Shaw, and getting to sort of see historical versions of certain kinds of characters, like the spy era, Victorian era Union Jack, or a colonial Captain America type. Salem witch trials, went back to that. So I stole a little bit of that kind of, let's play with a timeline and see the Phantom through through generations story. And again, Nick's art was perfect for it.
Yeah, it was. It did a great job. Like on that last panel, the Phantom's riding through the jungle, and then you see the lightning, and then there's the bad guy just behind him, and then it goes dark again and stuff like that. I'm not sure if you put that in the script or not, but it came to a great effect.
I'm sure that I put something that then Nick made infinitely better. Really confident.
Yeah, and that was and in that story again, you've got Diana, who gets captured, but she does up a great fight to the Wesakar demon dude and takes him on and stuff like that, and it shows that she was worthy to be alongside the Phantom and stuff. So it was an enjoyable story, that one.
Thank you.
that one's probably my favorite, just because I love. It was like the first time I'd ever seen a story again from like the point of view from the Masaka tribe and how they've kind of suffered from the humiliation of being defeated back in the 1530s or the 1540s, and then losing the Banda as their slaves and all that. And it's kind of like, well, what happened to them?
Right, and that's exactly kind of where it came from. Like, again, I will freely admit my knowledge of Phantom lore is limited, and so anytime I found something that I felt like, oh, this could be something I could sort of build upon or spin into something unexpected. And I remember reading about the tribes, and that one, the Wasaka specifically, was like, oh, there's an untold tale here. Let's see how do we tell it, and how do we then make it into something, big and epic that has weight and meaning. And I will say, I think probably of all the Phantom stories I wrote, that two-parter was probably the most thought through. I'm not saying the others weren't thought through, but there was a lot of like, okay, there's a lot of moving parts to this that I was trying to accomplish. The other ones I think were a lot cleaner and simpler in their approach. This one, I was like, I want this to be layered, and I'm probably not as layered as the Legacy book, but like this definitely was like an attempt. This is where my brain kind of got to the, hey, let's do something super layered with, where we're telling multiple stories at once within one very small 2-part story.
Yeah. So and obviously, plans change and and stuff like that, and we'll get into that in a second. But had you thought or had you planned follow-on stories or anything like that regarding the Curse of the Phantom?
No, I didn't. I think I kind of accomplished what I set out to do. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have had I continued. I'm sure it's, again, like I said, I stole from myself on other books. I'm sure I would have found a way to steal from myself again.
Yeah.
But no, there was no like, okay, then this is going to lead to that. It was like, let's do this. Let's wrap this up. Let's move on to something else.
Well, you moved on to the Aviatrix, the Aviatrix, which was a fun story. It followed on with Sala and the possibility that the Phantom sired her daughter. That was a fun story. I really enjoyed that one as well. Do you remember that story?
Yeah. That, I mean, again, another Pat Quinn extravaganza, which again we have to do wingsuits. I think in that one had the wingsuits.
Yes,
that was fun.
The beautiful covers from can't remember his name. Doug Kalaba.
Yes, Doug was fantastic. His paintings were beautiful. Again, it was. I was dipping my toe into classic Phantom characters, the Sky Band, and I was like, well, what's my spin on it? What's something that feels of today that we haven't seen?
Yeah. The thing that really, and with your stories and also with Mike's, but also with Moonstone in general, was just the fact that borrowed, that's probably not, it was like a continuation of the Lee Falk stories. It's not like you are setting out like Dynamite did and let's just blow everything up and let's just, ignore all the lore and just do what we want to do. It's like, well, hang on, no, this is the Phantom. This is what's come before. Let's add to it. Let's follow on. We've got you've got the Aviatrix, which is a follow-on from the Cyban, which everyone loves. It's in the movie. It's in, there's been many stories. You've got the Curse of the Phantom, which is following on from the Phantom's legacy story and the legacy book that you also did as well. There was a great respect for the Phantom, I feel, in everything Moonstone did.
Yeah, no, I mean they were big fans of the character and wanted to do it justice, and honestly, it's like this is, I think, growing up as a Marvel DC comic reader, where continuity is, is your history.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be slave to it. You can't paint yourself into corners and say, well, then it can't be this, it can't be that. But you can. Every story I wrote was always an attempt to extrapolate what came before. And it may not be, people may not like it. I can't control what people like or don't like, but I can say there is a logic to this. There is a possibility that this could come from that. Right. And, the Aviatrix believing that Sala, knowing Sala's her mother and thinking, oh, it's the Phantom, doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which I think is sort of the more tragic version of that story, where it's like, well, she's deluded herself into believing that this is her father because she's someone who clearly is looking for a father figure in her life, who didn't have that growing up. And is this why she ended up on this path? Like, these are questions you ask yourself when you dig into that. But again, being respectful to the lore and the history, and just saying, look, I'm not going to ignore it, but I'm also not going to let your expectations limit what we can do.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and meet and hopefully exceed your expectations by presenting something you didn't think, oh, this is where it's going to go, by surprising you. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I really enjoyed that story too. I thought it was fun.
So if, it's looking back, and it's probably like choosing your favorite child. Do you have a favorite story, or do you have a favorite moment from Moonstone or even Team Fantomen?
No, I as having two children, I love them both equally. So having worked with two publishers, I love them both equally. There are things that I love about all those things that make up the totality of my experience on the books. So I think I will give Curse of the Phantom the kudos for being a goal that I set out to achieve, and that regardless of audience reaction, in my mind, when at the end of the day, when that all came together, I was like, oh wow, I did what I wanted to do. I did what I set out to do. And so that, I think, was very satisfying. I think probably the most satisfying experience, but all of them were good experiences and for different reasons.
Spoken like a true father. I love you all. Love all the kids. Love all the stories equally. No, awesome. So, and I'm not sure whether you can share this or not, but could you tell us why you decided to step away from Moonstone? Was it the natural? Because I think you worked into career into film and TV after them. Was it just kind of like you wanted to push yourself to the next level? Did you get, what happened there?
It was a little bit of time and money. Again, the independent publishing didn't pay a lot. It couldn't pay a lot. And I was, so time spent working on things that, weren't going to, again, around that point, I did have at least one child and a second one possibly on the way. So it was like comics as a career was a struggle. And the more time I devoted to that, the less chance I was going to have of making the transition to a potentially more lucrative career, which honestly, film and television is. So I think at the time I felt like I had to choose. So I opted to pursue the path of greater resistance but greater reward. Not with some regret. I definitely I miss writing the Phantom. It's a character that I again didn't grow up loving, but I grew to love, and had worked with some really great talents, and would have loved to have done so again. I also think after writing Legacy, I didn't know if I had anything to say.
Okay.
That was also a big project, which I'm glad to have worked with Pat on that. Did we succeed at what we tried to do? I don't know, but it was definitely ambitious. That was definitely a big swing. I don't know what the reception to it was, but
it was
definitely hard.
To be fair, it was probably a little bit mixed.
Yeah.
I think it was probably. I'm just going to bring this up again for the video audience. I think it, like for me, reading in the writing sense, in that version of, was a little bit hard to read. But I also think it's probably the first time Phantom fans had actually ever seen something like this. In the art style, because this is like this is Pat Quinn. It's totally different than what he had done before.
Yeah,
it's an amazing. I look back at this now, and I'm just going, wow, this is amazing. But when I got it, I don't think I probably appreciated it as much as I do in looking at it now, and and in the story, because it's a like, I guess you're probably better off to describe it for those who have never read it. Like, what was your vision with Legacy, and
I just wanted to tell the origin, as if like it is something that is memoir, I forget. I know something inspired me to want to do this, and I can't. It's been so long. I can't remember what it was, what the impetus was. It was also an attempt to write prose in a style that I'd never written in before. It just felt like it's like I think part of the inspiration was like, if, let's say, the Phantom had, decide like in deciding on the journey of his life, deciding to chronicle it for himself and for future generations, so that they would understand why they do this. Why is this something that we as a family have chosen to be our legacy?
And the Phantom does have the chronicles as well, so it's almost like in looking at it now, and in looking at it probably as an older, wiser Phantom fan, if there's such a thing, it's kind of like you're looking at it and it's like, this is what the chronicles are like. This is what they would be like. There's, and you can picture yourself as a 16, 17-year-old Phantom son who's, going to become the Phantom. The story, and you're just devouring these stories and stuff like that. It's and looking at, it was a big risk, or a big step from Moonstone.
Yeah, I mean, rather than doing the kind of stories where it's like, oh, we sit, you bookend it with, let's open the chronicle and let's look at a story of the Phantom and see it play out. It was more of a, here's the book.
Yeah.
Here's the actual chronicle of the Phantom, and you understand, that you're reading the book.
Yeah. So does this one hold a special place?
It does. That was a lot of hard work for me. That's why seeing it again, I haven't seen it in a very long time, but that is exactly what we set out to do. I guess we kind of, again, varying degrees of success, and you can sort of see the in those pages you just scrolled through, you can sort of see here's Curse of the Phantom played out. Right. So it took some of my own continuity and maybe very self-servingly tried to cement it. I'm sorry. I just want to be remembered. Don't forget me. I'm in the Chronicles.
You're also on a podcast now as well.
Right.
No,
will live forever on the internet.
No. Yeah, it was awesome. So once you've finished from Moonstone, now I want to touch upon a little bit of your career in film and TV for a few reasons, because I got a question where I want to end us off. And so you went off to Warehouse 13, which is what you said, which ran for 5 seasons, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I remember I started watching Warehouse 13. It would have been season 2, 3, so kind of halfway in between, and then I went back and started from the beginning. There was a lot of fandom influences in there, whether it was accidental or on purpose, or whether it was already there. But was that a lot of fun?
Oh, it was a great job. I mean, it took my writing partner Derek Hughes and I about 8 years to break into television. So part of our journey was every year we'd submit sample scripts to the various studio writing programs, and every year we kept getting rejected, which is very frustrating. We'd go out for staffing meetings, which happens, usually in spring and summer for the shows that will then premiere in the fall. A couple of times we got close. We actually got staffing meetings, still didn't get the job. And after a few years of that, this is 2008. At this point, I've got 2 kids. I don't have a plan B. And my wife, who was thankfully, had the steady job and was sort of, while I was working on various projects here and there, sort of, she was the stability. The understanding was you've got 5 years to pull this off. I was on year 8. So
wow.
I already, too much to her credit, and to her, I'm so grateful to her for that, she gave me those extra few years, because, and I'll never forget, I was telling Derek, this was the summer of 2008, where, we're going for more of these meetings, general meetings. And I'm just saying to him, like, listen, man, if we don't get into the writing program this year, I got to figure something else out. I don't know what it's going to be. So we got to figure, it's either got to happen or I'm screwed. And then that was like right before we had a meeting with at NBC Universal, where we met with an executive, Erica Kinnair, who read a sample script we'd written based on the TV show Rescue Me. And she loved it and was like, look, NBC's got a writing program. I don't know if you're aware of it. I think you guys should submit to it. So I'm like, all right, we'll submit. We'll get rejected again, whatever, it's fine. Well, this year, that was the one that we got into. And ironically, it was the first one we got into. We were accepted to the CBS one and the Warner Brothers one for the first time ever. But we'd already decided to go with the NBC program. And it's a 10-week program. 5 weeks into it, we had a meeting with an executive at Universal named Nora O'Brien, who she was our mentor in the program. She was like, I think you guys would be great for this show, Warehouse 13. I'm going to recommend you. We had a meeting on Warehouse 13 with the executives. They recommended us, the showrunners. 5 weeks into the program, we got staffed on Warehouse 13. So didn't have to come up with a plan B. Finally got the foot in the door. And it was one of, you hear the horror stories about what it's like to work in a television writer's room. You got terrible bosses. You're stuck there till 2 a.m, working on stuff, breaking story. We had the best boss, who on day one, this guy, Jack Kenny, who was just like, look, I don't care what level you're at. If you've got a good idea, I want to hear it. If the janitor's good idea, I'll take it. I don't care. We are all in this together. We are a team. And he promoted us every season. And it was great to sort of work in that environment. And it was a fun show to make too, right?
Yeah.
It's got that steampunk aesthetic. It's got this, great historical element to it. This is the 13th warehouse. There have been, 12 others throughout history. And that warehouse moves when the balance of power shifts to another country. Like all this great mythology and canon, which we got to help build. And having, again, I won't take any credit for any similarities to the Phantom, but certainly the love of things like traditional characters and legacy stories and history being passed down through a person or an institution definitely influenced us as we were making that show.
Yeah, and then you've got there was the Chronicle stories as well, and then you had their possessions, and so and then there was a lot of similar artifacts that was in the Phantom Skull Cave, that was also in the Warehouse 13 Skull Cave, I guess you can call it.
We had so much stuff in the warehouse. Like the shelves were packed full of. I mean, there was a lot of bric-a-brac. Like our props team was fantastic. They just like combed flea markets and just loaded it up with stuff and just aged it, weathered it, and like put it with cobwebs and shit. It just made it really cool.
Yeah. It seemed like a lot of fun. Like I had a lot of fun watching it. It seemed like the main the characters who on the show as well seemed like they had a lot of fun as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. And I remember watching it, and then I saw your name, and I thought, and then the dots kind of joined up, and it's like, hey, he's right for the Phantom, and then it's like, oh, there's that kind of bit of influence, and it's all probably coincidental, but
yeah, I wouldn't say like I was like, oh, I'm gonna get some Phantom stuff in here, but there's definitely some subconscious, creativity at play there.
Mm. And then you went over to the Flash and Arrow as well.
Yes.
Now the reason I raised that is for listeners on the podcast, would have heard. I'm not sure whether you call it a pitch or an idea or whatever, but if I ever saw the ideal Phantom TV show or movie, it will go along very similar with how they did in the Arrow with the dual timelines, where you had the current Phantom, but then you also have the origin of the Phantom back in the 1500s. So you would be able to have the modern story, but then you would have the lore or the legacy of the Phantom being told at the same time, which would then help establish the character to the newer fans in a sense. Now that's how I would visionate it. Now, as someone who's actually a lot better and a lot more in the credits and the credential than me, if King Features came to you and said, Ben, we want you to do a Phantom TV show, or if you had to pitch it, how would you do it?
I mean, what you just said is actually a great way to do it. I think I actually have a slightly more radical take that's a kind of a big departure from what probably the Phantom fans would want. Just because I'd want to see. I don't know if it's more of a recognizing like that the Phantom comes from a place that's maybe not his own. I would actually like to see the Phantom like an African Phantom, to be honest. I would like to tell the story of someone who came from that world. Circumstances forced him to rise up to be a hero to protect his own country rather than be someone from somewhere else that ended up somewhere.
Is that because of the white savior, and it's probably not culturally acceptable?
A little bit of that, and I think there are hero stories to tell about people from certain places. You know what I mean? Like that we don't get to see that often. I think, Bengal is not Wakanda, but I think there are certain parallels to that, and I think there's an opportunity to see the Phantom story, same legacy, same tradition passed down through generations, but the origin of it comes from a different place. Again, radical. Very different, not traditional. I might upset Phantom fans. Good news is, don't worry, guys. I'm not doing it. No one's giving me the keys to that kingdom yet. As you've seen, from my work on the character, like I always try to find a different angle in, and that's something that would be very exciting to me. I remember, Sci-Fi did their Phantom show a few years, while I was still in Warehouse, and I think they embraced the wrong aspects of the character. Like they tried to sort of take instead of letting the Phantom be the Phantom, they felt the Phantom needed to be something else. And as a way of sort of updating the character, I think you can update the character in a different way. And make it relevant to today. I'm not saying he's irrelevant. He's always relevant. He's a hero. He's always relevant. The world needs heroes, and the Phantom is one of the greatest ones. Don't get me wrong. I just have a slightly different take that I'd love to see.
Yeah. So let's just say we stuck with the white Phantom, which
Sure,
kind of
sure,
sounds
of course.
racist. Do you would you think it would work him set in Africa, or would he have to be more set in, say, America or something like that? Like, do you? This is actually a conversation I've had with a couple of Phantom fans recently, and
Yeah.
I like in our in our society that we all are a part of at the moment. Could the Phantom be successful being based in Africa?
I believe so. I like to think so. Because to me, really, at the core of it, it's a family story.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that's something that's universal, regardless of, nationality, ethnicity, religion. Like, he's a husband and a father, and he's a hero, and he's someone who's trying to do good for all. Right. He stands as a force against evil. Right. Yep. I mean, again, slams evil. If you see evil, slam it.
It's corny, but it's catchy.
Listen, it worked for the movie. Look, I even have the rings.
Oh,
so,
yes. And is that a little statue next to it as well?
Yeah, sure, right there. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, that's a nice piece. That one.
Bone design.
Yeah,
yeah, I love it. Such a great piece. But no, I think what made Arrow successful, what makes the Flash successful, what makes any superhero story successful is it's not just about the hero, it's about the people around the hero, and whether it's a found family or in this case a literal family. You kind of see it now with Superman and Lois. It's very much about family, and I think the Phantom falls into that category. Oddly, I wouldn't want to see them in the United States. I mean, not to say that they couldn't have adventures here, but I wouldn't want it to be based here. I want it to be true to Bengala, true to the Skull Cave, true to all the trappings of what the Phantom is. Because that's not broke. That's not the thing that needs to change. It's just how you tell the story that needs to change, and what the expectation is. Again, the Invisible Phantom spoke to that notion. It was like in the world today, someone's not going to believe that this guy exists, right? There's a big hole you can poke in the Phantom lore, and that's the immortality of this guy. But at the end of the day, you can't poke that hole because of the people around him, because the relationships he has, because the myth is bigger than the reality. Yeah. And I wouldn't want to lose that. And I feel like, to me, that's where the sci-fi one went wrong, was that it tried to make it more credible to today by imposing today on the character rather than seeing the character through the lens of today.
It's interesting.
Right, because wasn't he like a spy or something?
Yeah, he was. It was the 22nd Phantom. Diana. He died. The 21st Phantom had died. Diana put him off for like foster care, and then he was just a snotty nosed brat, I guess you could call it. Mm-hmm. And then he had carpool, or parkour, where you jump up the side of buildings and stuff like that. Yeah. So he was an expert in that. And I thought Ryan Carnes actually did an okay job. I thought towards the end of it, it was actually getting quite good, but the costume and the helmet was probably one of the bigger stumbling blocks, I would say.
Right. Yeah. I just it's the kind of story you tell. Like look, piracy still exists, right? So, and corporate greed is an evil that the world needs to be fought by those who who are looking out for those that are being taken advantage of or oppressed or whatever. And so it's like the Phantom is always relevant. He's never irrelevant. It's just how you ground the kinds of stories you put him in, so that it's again, comics and the newspaper strips are one medium that have audience expectations are a certain kind of thing. You put it out on film and television, the expectations change because not everyone cares about the same thing that fans of that medium might care about. So you end up having to make adjustments and changes to sort of to suit a wide, I mean, you know, there's focus groups and demographics and all this stuff that, like, at the end of the day, executives decide, oh, this is the road we're going to go down creatively. It's not always the road you want to go down, or that's good for the character. And you end up with things that where it's like they're unrecognizable. But if you stay true to the core, then you should do okay.
Yeah, cool. So we can expect a TV show in about when?
I'll get right on. It's funny because I actually did, in knowing that we were going to be having this conversation, I reached out to my manager. I was like, so what studio controls the rights to the character right now? I was just curious. I'm curious to know. It doesn't mean anything's going to come of it, but but I'd like to know who has it and to get a sense of, like, are they, you know, are they just going to sit on it and not do anything, or are they, you know, are they looking to try and do something, and what might they want to do?
Yeah. Well, if you ever need any consultants, any consultancy work or anything like that, you got my email address.
I know where to turn. No, absolutely.
It was especially, well, because we see so much stuff like on Netflix and all that at the moment. Like I saw today that Super Ted's got a new TV show. She-Ra's just been re-imaged and stuff like that. So, and with saturation of the media market, always looking for something new, surely there is room for the Phantom to come with a new TV
I think so.
show.
I think you know, you could get a great, again, yes, keep him based in Africa, but the stories don't have to just be about the Phantom protecting Africa. Like, you can do the international version of the Phantom where he is still who he is. He's not a spy or anything else. He's still the Phantom, but the stories take him to places that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, no, very good. Well, I look forward to it's interesting that you've contacted your agents. Hopefully something comes by. Yeah. Now, I don't have any more questions. Do you have anything that we might have missed, or a question you wish we asked, or anything like that?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for pulling up the old books on the screen, because like I told you earlier, like, my memory is fuzzy at best. It's been a long time since I got to write the Phantom, but it brought it all back, and I really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate it. And I hope your audience learned some things that maybe they didn't know, or they can always reach out to me on social media. Always happy to take a question from a fan, and I really appreciate you guys doing this.
No worries. So if any company, Team Fantomen or Fru or anyone reaches out looking for a Phantom story, would you write any more, or?
If I had time. I'd have to figure out, what it is I'd want to write about. As I did with those other stories, like what's a dangling thread, or a potential dangling thread that no one's explored. And I'm sure people smarter and better than me have dug into things, but who knows what seeds they've planted that can be built upon. But yeah, I mean, if the phone rings or the email comes in, it's like, never say never.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed chatting with you. I hope our listeners enjoyed listening as well. Enjoyed kind of learning a little bit about some of those stories that I grew up on, that I enjoyed reading in the late 90s and early 2000s. Hopefully we'll see your name splash up on some more screens when we're watching the new Phantom TV show. And so if people want to look at you, obviously they can look at your credits on IMDb. Do you have like
IMDb.
IMDb, yeah. Do you have like a website or anything like that also that people can follow you on?
No, I mean, you can just find me on Twitter at Wonder Masons.
No worries. Well, on our show notes, we'll have a link to that as well. So I really appreciate you joining us today, Ben. Now, listeners, thank you for listening to us. Obviously, you can find us at our website, which is chroniclechamber.com. Email if you've got any further questions or any comments that you want to share about today's podcast. You can either email us, which is chroniclechamber@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter. We're also on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram as well. And as we said before, this podcast will be on iTunes, which will be the video podcast. So if you want to look through the stories as we're flicking through them, as myself and Ben are talking about them, YouTube's the best way for that. If you want to listen to it on audio while you're doing your exercises or driving to work or something like that, we're on Spotify, we're on iTunes. And if you are an Android user, some of the Android apps like Podbean, Player FM, Castbox, Listen Notes as well. So I thank you everyone for listening. Shout out to Dan and Stephen who couldn't join us today. They'll be with us next time. Ben, again, thank you a lot for thank you so much for joining us. And for myself, happy fans.
Sole survivor of a shipwreck, and upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die."
The Phantom,
The ghost who walks,
the Phantom,
enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't mind the Phantom.